Well, I had hoped to record this video in my favorite spot out on the deck, but storm's coming. And if you're in Arizona, you know when the storm comes, you got to be mindful of what's going on. Especially the storms this past week have been crazy. And storms are very much a part of our lives. And there's also I guess what was hurricane traveling up the East Coast at the moment as well, dumping lots of rain. And I'm a weather geek to begin with, but storms have always fascinated me, whether it's thunderstorms, as is about to happen here, snowstorms, hurricanes, all that kind of stuff. It's just kind of fascinating to watch it all unfold because it almost looks and feels like nature is just releasing everything on us in those moments. And we know we've seen lots of destruction that happens when storms roll through, tornadoes, hurricanes, everything else that happens. And yet there's still something very fascinating about it because we have zero control of it. And no matter how much they can predict weather, and obviously even in my lifetime it's gotten way better at being able to predict paths and everything else when it comes to storms, in the end you still cannot control it. None of us can control what's about to happen and how nature is going to unleash itself on us right here in just a few moments. No control whatsoever. And all we could do is really be patient and wait it out in that moment and see how it unfolds. And I think storms are also very much a part of our lives. And the way we react to storms, the storms that come through our own lives, mimic in some ways how we have to respond to storms that happen in the natural world, of which we are a part of. Like, we're not separate from what's happening outside the window right here. That storm is still a part of. I'm still a part of that. And when those storms approach our lives, our tendency is to react and often overreact. Someone who grew up on the East Coast, that was extremely common with winter storms, of just overreacting, and you got to go buy everything that's out there because you might not be able to get out for a day. And yet that overreaction just becomes a normal part, and we joke about it, and yet it still happens. Like, it's 2024. The chances that you won't get out for a while are slim to just about none. And hunkering down and waiting for the storm to pass is probably a better model, even in the storms that come through and enter our lives as well. Because the more we overreact to it and the more we even react to the storms that come to us, we literally get caught up in that. And if you've been around me, you know I often use hurricanes as a metaphor that we we essentially live in a constant hurricane. That's the way it sometimes feels in our world. Like, there's just constant swirling. But the key part of a hurricane is the high eye of the storm. And in the eye of the storm, and if you follow weather, the tighter the eye, the stronger the storm, the stronger the chaos that is around it. And so the eye of the storm is the place where you often want to be. Now, you wouldn't make the choice to go there because eventually the chaos is going to move with it. But in that moment, the eye of the storm is the place to be. Sun shining, it's calm, it's relatively smooth. And I've learned that to live in this world in many ways, and to especially working with people, because if people are not aware, they just unload all their shit on you. That in those moments, you really got to be the eye of the storm. Like, you really got to hold your center and hold your space. You got to know yourself well enough that you're not going to allow yourself to get caught up in the chaos and the storm that is all around it, because you just become part of the problem. And that's really what we see all the time. And so I'm always mindful of that in situations, and certainly working with people, is taking a step back in some ways is, can you stand in the middle of the storm and look at it with a 360 picture? Can I look at the entirety of it just to give it perspective, just to give some context to what's really going on? Because if you're in it, it's really hard to see. If you think of movies where there are tornadoes and such, and everything's just kind of blowing around, it's very hard to see down the street or much further down your life, because there is this swirling, that there is all this debris, there's all often even other people's shit getting tossed around in our own lives, that we don't have the ability to have perspective, we don't have the ability to have context to what's really going on. And so the eye is where it's at. The eye is where it's at. And so storms are fascinating in that way, because as much as we don't have control over them, we often don't have control over those storms that we experience in our lives as well. We just don't. We just don't have that control. We, we, we barely, at times, it feels like, have control over our own lives. And when everyone else is caught up in the chaos, forget it. You have very little control. And so, working with leaders and people in leadership position, uh, and I don't care who you are, if you are in a leadership position, you have to work at becoming the eye of the storm. You just have to. You have to. There is no other way around it. You got to be the center. You got to be that source of groundedness, because you're going to be dealing with everyone else around you and their problems and their issues. And if you're not careful, and again, we all do this at one time or another, all those problems just kind of go, and they collapse onto us. And before you know it, you can't sleep. You're exhausted. You're anxious. You're burning out. You become ineffective. You become ineffective as a leader because you have allowed the storm to consume you. So I watch the sky get darker and darker here, and it's windy and everything is blowing. It's a good reminder to me of. I mean, I remember preaching on it years ago, before I was even a priest, of that image of the hurricane, because I think it's one of the most effective metaphors that we have from the natural world, where there could be so much chaos and yet a source of calm in the center of it. It's a chaotic world. People's lives are chaotic. People live day to day. There's not much leeway as to making mistakes in life. And so I think what we look for in leaders now, we don't need the beat you over the head kind of leader. It just is not effective. We need the leader that is confident in themselves, even though that confidence will be tested at times. I've been there many times over. You got to have that self-confidence. You have to have a great degree of awareness of what's your shit and what's someone else's, and don't let those those two cross. You got to be empathetic. You got to be a person who understands people and how they operate, and why they do what they do. And the more you could do that, and the more you could stand in your own values and your own personhood, the more you can be that model of consistency, of slow and steady, of holding space, of being the eye of the storm. You become effective as a person of change from that position, much more than if you find yourself in the storm. It's just not going to change. Nothing's going to change if you allow yourself to stay in the storm. You got to become the eye. You got to become, in the spiritual world, you got to become that third eye, and have that objectivity and that sense of perspective and context, in order to be the most effective leader, a leader that we desperately need in this world and in our different environments. So as the storm rolls in, I'm just mindful of that. As this weather geek is mindful of all of that happening, it's a good reminder for me to stay centered, stay grounded, be that eye, let the chaos happen. And in that chaos comes a new order, comes change, comes possibility that we may have not seen before. And maybe most importantly, is where creativity happens. And we need that creativity. We need that right brain working more effectively for us. But first and foremost, be the eye, be the center, be the grounding that the people around you really need.